The Myanmar junta-planned elections cannot be considered legitimate. Let me explain. Let us talk about the rules of the game. The election is being organized based in 2008 Constitution, a constitution written by the military that guarantees 25% of all parliamentary seats at the union and the state regional levels for the armed forces of Myanmar or Tatmadaw and grants them effective veto power over any constitutional amendment, a system built to keep them in power. After the 2021 coup, the junta extended emergency rule far beyond what the Constitution allows. By doing that, they violated the very legal framework they now claim that gives them authority to run an election. The military is persistent regarding their claims of irregularities in the 2020 election, although it remains unproven as no credible evidence has been presented. Independent observers verified that the election results reflected the electoral's will. Without any proof, this claim cannot serve as a legal or moral basis for nullifying the results of the previous election or for calling new elections. Using unverified allegations to justify control over the electoral process undermines both legality and legitimacy. Hence, the military junta has neither constitutional nor democratic legitimacy to call the elections. The mandate of the people remains with the lawmakers elected in the 2020 general election until genuine and transparent elections can be held.
Elections in Myanmar cannot be free and fair under military junta. Let me explain why. First, the entire environment is repressive. People live under the surveillance every day. Since the 2021 coup, thousands have been arrested just for expressing an opinion. Protests are crushed, journalists are jailed, media outlets are shut down, and even the internet is heavily restricted. Myanmar now scores only 9 points out of 100 in the Internet Freedom Index. Second, the junta is using the new election protection law to silence any criticisms. By the 30th of October 2025, 88 people have been prosecuted in 40 cases. People have been given 47 to 49 years of sentences simply for opposing the junta's elections. That is not an election environment, it is full of intimidation. Third, the electoral system itself is engineered to keep the military in power. The mixed voting rules in the way of that favors the military-backed parties, and they can still claim the legitimacy even if large part of the population don't participate in the elections. And on top of that, the political parties are tightly controlled. Parties that criticize the military can be deregistered. Several parties have been already dissolved and even candidates have been disqualified. So here is the bottom line. You cannot have a free or fair and credible election when people are silenced, intimidated, or excluded. Without basic rights and freedoms, any elections under junta is simply not legitimate.
The credibility of the Myanmar junta-planned elections is fundamentally undermined. Let us explain.
Although the Junta Election Commission announced that domestic and international observers may apply, this invitation functioned largely as a symbolic gesture intended to project legitimacy rather than enable genuine scrutiny. ASEAN was formally invited, but after the consultation led by Malaysia, the bloc collectively declined to deploy observers, citing the concerns over the credibility, inclusivity, and the integrity of the process. Individual ASEAN members may still send their representatives, highlighting the bloc's continued limitations under its non-interference principle. Meanwhile, the junta reports that observers from Russia, Belarus, India, Cambodia, and Laos will take part, with China expected to provide technical support, an agreement that reflects existing political alignment rather than independent oversight.
By contrast, credible monitoring bodies have also rejected participation. We at ANFREL arrived at a principled decision not to seek accreditation and deploy any international observers. The European Union has also declined, stating the process cannot be free or fair. International IDEA has likewise affirmed that the polls do not meet international standards. In short, no independent professional observation mission will be present, making transparency impossible to verify and legitimacy impossible to establish. This moment demands clarity from the international community. We must collectively refuse to legitimize a process designed to entrench military rule and instead intensify support for the democratic aspirations of the Myanmar people.
Hello, Asia, and hello, world. Did you miss us? Things have been quite busy for us, but the Election Observer podcast is back for a special episode. Today, we'll discuss the current situation in Myanmar ahead of the military junta planned elections and the realities of election observation under the military rule. The Asian Network for Free Elections recently launched an assessment report on the upcoming Myanmar junta planned elections, where ANFREL identified 15 aspects of the electoral process which demonstrate that the elections staged by the junta in Myanmar do not align with international standards and cannot be considered credible or legitimate. The findings of the assessment report were incorporated in a mini video series called hashtag Let Me Explain, which focused on three key indicators, namely one, the lack of legal leg of the planned elections to stand on, two, violations of fundamental rights and freedoms, and three, the absence of genuine transparency and independent oversight. ANFREL has had a long history of supporting the democratization process in Myanmar, having observed previous elections and engaged with various electoral stakeholders through programs and activities that empower them to push for sustainable democracy. Today, we invited colleagues who have extensive experience engaging with electoral stakeholders in Myanmar and its democratization process prior to the military staging of a coup in 2021. I'm your host, John Antiquera, and we are live via ANFREL's Facebook and LinkedIn pages, as well as via ANFREL's YouTube channel. This episode will later be available on the Election Observer podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are joined today by my colleagues at ANFREL, uh, Ms. Corazon Ignacio, ANFREL Secretary General, Mr. Tarindo Aberatna, ANFREL Senior Program Officer for Campaigns and Advocacy, and Mr. Amael Vier, ANFREL Myanmar Program Electoral Analyst. Good morning, Ma'am Cora, Tarindu, and Amael. Welcome to the Election Observer podcast.
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah,
Good
I know
morning. Thank you.
as I said earlier, I know we sent questions, but I tried to streamline those questions a bit so that we wanted this conversation to be more of a conversation between colleagues, as we are colleagues. No, let's talk first about how it was prior to the coup in 2021. Myanmar was in what we would say a democratization phase, having come from a long military rule. Can you share with us ANFREL's experience in engaging in the democratization process, as well as what was the level of ANFREL's engagement and what was the reception of the people, particularly the stakeholders, including the voters, civil society, organizations, and the government in our engagement? Anyone can take the question. Ma'am Cora, can we ask you first?
Oh, okay. Um, I am proud to say that I have been involved in various initiatives, particularly as election observer into elections 2015 and the by-election in 2017. I also had a chance to participate in two very important undertakings. We had funders who wanted to enhance the domestic election capability, the domestic monitoring capability of civil society organizations. So we had two or three sessions in ethnic areas. I remember we traveled 5 hours from Yangon to get to these places. And number three, there was a planning session between the UEC leaders, and the civil society organizations facilitated by ANFREL. Luckily, foreign donors love to promote democratization in Myanmar. So ANFREL was fully supported by funders and donors to undertake these activities. So I can say that the CSOs have been fully, well, not fully ripened, but are have internal capability. Aside from this, I understand that there are other activities like training for journalists and media personnel and other activities which my other colleagues can speak about. Now, with regards to, I'd like to move on to the initiatives in election monitoring. ANFREL has been involved in observing the elections in 2015, 2017, 2019, and in 2020. So our presence there is an indication of our desire to assist in the democratization of Myanmar, but hopefully it has come to this stage where we are. Thank you, John.
Yes. Taringdo, you were our Myanmar resident program officer. No, can you tell us about what ANFREL did in Myanmar prior to the coup in 2021?
Yeah, if I may add what Ms. Cora also mentioned, so like I think ANFREL been engaged a quite long time in the democratization process in Myanmar, even before 2015 elections, like even 2013. I think during the by-elections also ANFREL, if we still have, I think you can find it online. Like there are some reports that ANFREL made about those elections, and also as earlier mentioned that ANFREL is one of the organization who extensively work with the domestic election observer groups those days prior to the 2015 elections in order to capacitate them, because 2015 election was one of the election that happened after a very long period of military rule. There were no practices of conducting observation before that. So in 2000, particularly 2014 15, ANFREL did a lot of training programs for the domestic election observer groups to introduce them about domestic election observation, the methodologies, provide a lot of support. And even after 2015, we did the same to continue to strengthen the citizen election observation in the country, and also about the with the media itself, because media is part of the very important pillar when it comes to free and fair elections, right? So their capability when it comes to provide information people to get have their informed decision is very important. So that is another aspect that we also worked with. I think apart from that, just to mention about earlier, Score also mentioned that about the exchange that we had in Nepido with the Union Election Commission, that we were able to share the experience with the UEC at that time, like the experience coming from the other regional election commissions. So I remember we had some representative from Philippines, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, as I remember, like, so that
Malaysia too.
yeah, Malaysia, also that they were sharing their best case practices when it comes to election, like the planning election, and it was well received by the UEC also that time. Yeah.
Mael, what do you have?
I don't have much to add to what my colleagues already said. Maybe just to finish painting the picture on domestic election observation, there were a lot of groups that mobilized as early as 2012 when the first open by-election took place. But ahead of the 2015 first open national election, there were dozens of different groups all over the country that mobilized tens of thousands of observers. And you had all kinds. You had some were faith-based organizations, you had youth groups, you had proper ad hoc election monitoring CSOs as well. So you had a lot of appetite from people and from civil society to participate in the country's elections and to help drive the electoral process forward. Elections were imperfect at the time, as was to be expected, but those groups contributed hugely to voter education, to ramping up the understanding of what an electoral process is, and they were very important. We also saw that happen in 2020. However, with the pandemic, there were restrictions. Some people were not able to participate to the same extent. But I just want to mention the eagerness of civil society to participate in in the last two general elections, and I think we'll contrast that with what's happening now, maybe a bit later on.
Mhm. I think I also just wanted to add, no, you mentioned various civil society organizations engaged in the process. And I remember there's also a persons with disability group that was also
But
observing elections in
Yeah.
Myanmar, which
there
was
were
not,
many. Yeah,
yes, right? Which is not very common in other countries, but that there are organizations like that are engaged in the process and that are also looking at the inclusion aspect of the elections.
absolutely.
Yes.
It's common in many countries, but in Myanmar even more so. You also had LGBTQ
Yes.
communities, also observing nationally and also locally. There were
Mhm.
so many groups that were contributing, and not everybody actually had a positive opinion of the elections. Some were very critical.
Mhm.
Some were a lot more upbeat because it was a new process being introduced. So just the diversity of the takes and the groups that were participating, that's what makes election observation important, that people participate and have a stake in the process beyond just showing up on election day for a few minutes. So that's all for me.
Yep. As Steve mentioned, ANFREL has observed elections in Myanmar. In the last election in 2020, before the military staged the coup, ANFREL said that despite the shortcomings of the electoral process, the results were by and large representative of the will of the people of Myanmar. I wanted to ask also, no, what were the key issues, not just in the 2020 election, but also in the previous elections that ANFREL has observed? What were the key issues in the elections in Myanmar uh, that needs improvement or need some serious reforms? Maybe Amael can go first since you're
Yeah.
our election observation program officer then.
Thanks, John. So it's actually a very complicated question because elections in Myanmar, Myanmar was really coming from far behind a lot of countries in terms of elections. It was a relatively new process, and so there were a lot of imperfect areas of the election. One was the voter list. Um, so first, I want to address that the military used the voter list as the rationale behind the coup. They were saying that upwards of 30% of voters on that list were fake. There were a lot of duplicate names, dead people, underage people. When I speak about problems on the voter list, it's not to the same extent at all. It's not 30+%, but there were a lot of small issues that are linked more widely to the issue of registries, population registries in Myanmar, which are very complicated. Myanmar has a lot of undocumented citizens. A lot of people are very transient because they move for work or they are displaced because of armed conflicts. So it's very difficult to have accurate and comprehensive population registries, and that was in a large part reflected into the voter lists. The
Mhm.
Election Commission, to their credit, did make a lot of efforts to get people to register and to vote, but there were corrections to be made. That was true in 2015, that was true in 2020, not to the extent that the military is saying, um, but because names in Myanmar are often similar, so if you don't have an accurate birth certificate and the similar names to somebody else, duplicates can happen. People can be registered in different places. That was something that could have been improved, and um, it's an incremental process. Elections, really, every electoral process ideally should be better than the previous one. Other issues include the appointment of the Election Commission, which was always unilaterally appointed by whoever was the government of the time. So the NLD government appointed their own Election Commission, which they had the right to by law, but it's not the best practice because it's not multi-partisan, where you co-opt people from different groups or from different political parties. That's what we like to see ideally in most countries. That wasn't the case in Myanmar. There were also election cancellations, a lot of them due to conflict, but in 2020, especially, there was some criticism that some areas being cancelled did not actually have conflicts, so that some cancellations were potentially politically motivated. Um, Voter education, there was a lot that could be done on this just because the general civic education of the people was lacking. Also, the huge diversity of Myanmar in terms of geographical context, languages, religions, everybody kind of related to the elections in a different manner. So you had to reach out to those people, and that was not always done perfectly. So I think I'll end the list here, but just there was a lot of room for improvement. But again, the substance of were people able to participate and to express their will freely was there, and that's the single most important component. Um, so I think we prefer to see it as glass half full, or at least mostly full. There is more that can be done, but I don't want to undermine the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Marindo.
Just to add, like, I think another area that there were some issues like the advance voting process as well, particularly when it comes to the military advance voting. So we know in the advance voting process, the military also can make the advance vote, and that but the issue was there that it was not open to the public or the election observers. So it been conducted inside the military compounds. At the same time, in Myanmar, there is a thing that like these military families are usually live inside the military compounds. So on the election day, that they also have to vote. These people, there were like polling stations established inside the military compound itself on the election day. So that happened actually in the 2015 election. So there myself like was one of the observer in 2015. I remember in Mon State we were going inside the military compounds on the election day to observe the polling stations. But what happened later in 2000, by the time of 2018 by elections, the
Mm-hmm.
election commission was able to bring those military the polling station inside the military compound to the outside, so
Mm-hmm.
where you see there were more transparency, and then
Yep.
I mean at the end of the day it improves the process, right? Like the
Yep.
transparency of the process. So that is the one good thing happen over the time, that if you see one of the achievement, right? But still the advanced voting process inside the military compounds still were, close to the public, close to the observers and all. That was one of the issue. As Amal also have mentioned, the security situation, because Myanmar, especially when it comes to the border areas where uh, we still, like at that time also, even though there was a national wide ceasefire agreement, especially in Rakhine and also some northern Shan state, some of the parts they were not able to have the election, and there were no security condition to have the elections. But we also seen that in some township, in some areas, the election being conducted, while the other part of the townships, the election was not being there. So I those are, I think, some of the other areas to add, like the when it comes to the issue. But as Amal also mentioned, by largely the people were able to participate, and election commission at that time from 2015 to 2020, that election commission was able to get the trust from the people
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day. So that's the most important thing, like the people trust the process at the end. So I think that's an achievement. And also, just to add, like I remember when it comes to tabulation process,
Mm-hmm.
and also there were some, let's say 2015, there were some issues, where that there, when it comes to transparency, observers were not able to really go and see this tabulation process. But later we also have seen, by the time of 2017 by election and then 2020 election, those were also gradually improved, that we were able to access in some of the areas when it comes to tabulation. And also those tabulation process were also computerized later, after 2017. So that was another good big achievement the election commission at that time did when it comes to improving the system itself. Yeah.
Ma'am Cora.
Um, I'd like to pick up from where Tarindo said confidence in the
Mhm.
election.
Yes.
And in my mind, I cannot shift from one election to the other because each election in time has different property.
Yes.
For example, 1960, before 1960, I understand that it was a fair multi-party election with not many stakes. So it was a
Mhm.
good one and it received acceptance.
Mhm.
Yes. In 1990, it was a multi-party election participated in by the two major parties, the military party and the NLD, but the military nullified the election in 1990. In 2010, the military led government held another election and
Mhm.
there was opposition. So even if they tried to improve the system, it couldn't be credible if you had only one party participating.
Yes.
In 2015, they had the big real election. I
Mhm.
think you can say that this is the golden period of, you see a glimmer of hope
Yes.
in that election because it was participated in. The election was very vibrant and robust.
Mhm.
And, the word organic came only later. Um, the word organic election um, means the people participated from the start to the finish.
Yes.
And in some instances where the parties they like do not have funding, they fund the campaign. And I saw that in 2015 election. People were buying t-shirts,
Mhm.
people red t-shirts. As a matter of fact, my partner then, Hero from Japan,
Mhm.
he had this agenda of looking for a red t-shirt and he couldn't find because it
Mhm.
was selling so fast. He was willing to buy it and
Mhm.
people were buying the t-shirt. So,
Mhm.
and people were distributing food during the campaign. People were providing vehicles. So it was a very organic, vibrant election. As a matter of fact, I remember in 2015, people stayed to observe the counting.
Mhm.
Mm.
Remember? Um,
Mhm.
until 12 o'clock. And people were so happy. People were feeding us. Ordinarily, we cannot be allowed to accept food, but we did. Now I can confess, we were fed during the 2015 election by the people because they were so happy that there were foreign observers.
Mhm.
Uh, I think the mentality was we have we have allies, we have friends watching the election. So this must be a what do you call this, a trustworthy election.
Mhm.
But in 2020 the same elements were present but the military nullified the election again. So you have fits and starts of election,
Yes.
uh crooked line. The democratization goes in crooked line. Sometimes it is almost there, sometimes it makes a bad turn because of the military element. And now you
Mhm.
have a 2025 election which is run, the title of our report says, in or even our podcast, in a militarily planned election. So how good can it be? Can people trust the result? Will it not be overturned, the result? Because it is traumatic for people to have two elections overturned by one
Mhm.
element of the society.
Mhm.
So I do not know. It's the trust and confidence I am worried about. We can talk about the improvement in the management of the election,
Yes.
but it will be nullified if there is certainty that it will not be nullified by a strong element of society with force and might. Then all the other elements, even if you apply the best methodology, the best election observation practices, what will it result to?
Mm. Yes. So just to also, as we say at ANFREL, no, there's no perfect election, no, but as we have observed in our previous observation missions, there have been improvements to for in the elections in Myanmar to align with standards towards a more democratic and inclusive um, elections. But then, of course, also public confidence in the process is also important as an indicator of a successful election. But just fast forward to today, in terms of like people's trust in the election, there have been a number we've heard in the news. There have been a number of people protesting these elections, and with the continued shrinking civic spaces in Myanmar, to say the least, no people who have openly opposed the elections or what the junta might deem as opposition to the elections in the country have been met with dire consequences. So my next question is, how are local actors, including civil society groups and activists, navigating these conditions? And would we know if there are efforts to shed light on what's happening in Myanmar, particularly in the upcoming elections?
Thanks, John. If I can start answering this, there are a lot of different organizations working on the elections in different regards, and not just the elections. There are a lot of media, for instance, and civil society organizations working to disclose what the military has been doing since the coup.
Mhm,
The issue is that the military is weaponizing its legal arsenal to shut underground anybody who criticizes them. So you
mhm,
have many media from Myanmar operating either underground in Myanmar, most often in areas that are not controlled by the military, or in exile. Many media outlets from Myanmar are actually in Thailand or in other neighboring countries because they cannot operate safely from mainland areas of Myanmar.
mhm,
The same is true for many civil society organizations. There's a new NGO registration law that was passed after the coup. It's very difficult to get registered as an NGO. You need to be very junta aligned to get registration. If you're not registered, basically it makes it very difficult to operate. So a lot of CSOs have gone underground, gone into exile. They've stopped operating, or they're operating on very non-political issues. They maybe are targeting things more like education, health, things that are more consensual because there's a lot of risk to operating in Myanmar if you're not registered. And if you are registered, either as a media, as a political party, as an NGO, you cannot speak freely about a lot of those topics. Um, so you really have two camps, very, very broadly, I would say. You have the registered camp, again, applies to pretty much any entity, and you have the non-registered. That's where a lot more of the factual research and opinions come from. Um, so you can have this division, including in election observation.
mhm.
Quite frankly, I think I'll stop here because I think my colleagues may want to add something.
Tarindo or Ma'am Cora?
Let
Yeah.
me say something. I
Yes, ma'am.
Amael is better equipped to be talking about this because she and May conducted a pre-election assessment that has been the basis of ANFREL's decision to not observe this election, lest
Mhm,
our presence there will lend legitimacy to the election. My
mhm,
only one input is I asked my interpreter. She is about in her late 30s. In my election observation in Myanmar, we were assigned interpreters, right? And I
yes.
asked her, "Are you voting?" I did not even tell her there will be this podcast. "Are you voting?" She says, "No, my
Mhm,
group and I not
mhm,
going to." "Will you not be punished for not voting?" She says, "The law says we may not vote, but our ward leader says we should."
mhm,
I do not know if the ward leader is a military officer or the civilian ward leader, but her parents will. I said, "Why will they vote?" "It's a habit." She says,
ah,
"It's a habit." So
mhm,
what I got is that younger people will stay away,
Mm-hmm.
well, if my reading is right, Mael can confirm this. Younger people will stay away, but people will still vote out of
Mm-hmm.
habit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also about like talking about like younger people, like we seen like even last couple of years the military also brought the this conscription law where
Mm-hmm.
that mandatory military service, because simply the military was running out of their like the numbers when it comes to, because they have a lot of resistance all across the Myanmar. So this also, I think, led a lot of younger people to leave the country. If you see, for example, in Thailand, uh, today a lot of young people are moved here, like some have documents, some do not have documents. So the younger people also moved away, and also the younger people also moving to the areas where they have safe. For example, if you are living in a rural area, so you are more likely to be part of the conscription,
Mm-hmm.
and so that they are moving to the areas where like Yangon, like that you they have a more safer space and all. But in these rural areas are the areas where that the military also can have sort of push people to go and vote. Yeah, we also have seen these there are multiple reports, maybe Amal can later elaborate on that. The military has been pushing, and then through their administrative structures, like Mme. Cora earlier mentioned, the vote and village track officials, to push people to go and vote even though that they do not really wanted to take part in the election. We also have seen last couple of weeks the out of country voting in different places like Bangkok, South Korea, in many different places. Even though the military this election, so they opened the registration, very low number of people have registered, and during the voting time also it's a very low number of people went to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Even so that's a very indication the difference between what happened previously and now, right? So where we talk about very festive a time where people go and vote and they really want to take part in this process. Even the as Amail earlier mentioned, not just the election observer groups or like the people who work on the governance, the others like the PWD groups, the LGBT groups, and the younger generation, the faith-based group. So they were very much interested and to take part in this process. It comes to a point where the people do not really want to take part. The military has to push them and then threaten them, create
Mm-hmm.
intimidation for make sure that they go and vote on the election day. So that it's entirely the situation has changed. And also with regards to the election observer groups, as John asked earlier, the election observer groups, they have a lot. Like if you really look at 2015 to 2020, the observation become very vibrant within the
Mm-hmm.
country. So we see there are observer groups that observe all across the election cycle, from the pre-election to post-election, more comprehensive manner. And also we've seen the groups like do the media monitoring, the gender aspects of the election. So there were like there are different thematic observer groups as well. So the most of the groups who did those observation right now, they cannot do it inside the country because you cannot criticize the process. So later maybe we will also talk about the election protection law, that you cannot criticize anything.
Mm-hmm.
So how you can observe and then you present your finding? If you criticize anything about the process, that you will be going to the jail, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what we see right now, those exile groups and even the ones who are inside the country, there are a big movement within the community, the Myanmar community, to talk against this election. So we also have seen the last week, Amal was present in the launch of the Charm election tracker. So a group of civil society get together and then put up a website that to translate all the reports are coming from Burmese and different Myanmar languages to English, so the international community can see what is really happening inside Myanmar. You see, multiple groups are coming up with different also the statements, and then there are findings about what is happening in Myanmar, so that they all get together to show the world, and then even the people within the Myanmar, to for them to understand what is actually happening inside. So from election of very vibrant election observation now become, they are taking a different route to expose what's happening, really happening in the ground. Yeah.
Yes. No, before we move to my next question, no, just I wanted to ask Amael also to help us understand the situation in Myanmar. And I believe the elections are not happening in the entire country. It would be
Correct.
done in phases, but it's not happening in many parts of the country. And that, correct me if I'm wrong about this, that there really is no minimum threshold for the voter participation or voter turnout to declare that the elections were valid. Can you share more about this so that people can also be informed about it?
Correct. So thank you, John, for this question. So the legal framework for elections in Myanmar is actually very loose by international standards. There's a reason for that historically. That was armed conflict, because there has never been one election held in every single part of the country. Because of the long-standing civil war, it just was never possible. So that's the basis. But the legal framework basically does not require that the election be held at the same time all over the country. So that's why they're able to do it in phases. It does not require a minimum number or percentage of constituencies. So even if 50% of constituencies don't get to participate, that can still be technically a legally valid election. And that's what the junta is banking on. Even worse than that, you can even have partial cancellations within townships. So you can say, okay, this township will vote, but all of those areas within township are not safe. So only the city center can vote and not the rest. So that's also something that they're using. And as you said, there's no minimum voter turnout either. That in terms of international standards, that one is more inconsistent. But there are some countries that say if fewer than 50% of people vote, the elections are not valid. We need to have new ones. It's not the case in Myanmar. To be fair, it's not the case in many Asian countries. But all of those limitations make it so that the junta can hold very partial elections and um, still call them legally binding elections. Actually, the, at the moment, so there's a phase three of the elections that is supposed to take place on January 25 that is still not confirmed. So I'm still working on the assumption of phase one, which is December 28th, and phase two, which is January 11th. Phase three, as long as it's TBC, I'm not really including it in any assessment, because the point is that even with those phase one and two, so 202 townships out of 330, the military can still have a parliament that's filled over 75% after these elections. So there's a huge imbalance between how much of the territory and the people are covered and the future parliament. In addition, I want to mention that even within those 202 townships that we know elections will take place in, on December 5, the Election Commission announced further cancellations at the town and village ward level. So these are the lowest level administrative units. Uh, about 17% of those units across the country within the townships that have elections have been cancelled. And in some places, that changes the configuration immensely. You go from a state that technically will have elections in every single township, and then if you remove all of those tidbits that will not have elections, you actually find that you have only about 40 to 50% of the territory that will be covered. Um, Purportedly, that's based on security reasons, although it's very hard to have granular insight as to exactly what places are being affected. There are some emerging criticism that some people are saying the elections are being cancelled more for political purposes, where the junta doesn't have sufficient control or they cannot ensure the outcome of the election. They can just pick and choose, basically. So it's gerrymandering, but not from the redistricting, from just a very procedural, well, like we're going to have elections here, but not there, and that makes it very difficult to have any insight into. But yes, the big picture is elections. Phase one and two may cover 40 to 50% of the entire country. Phase three may cover a bit more. Not sure, and there are 56 townships. If I'm correct, I think that's the number. That will not have any elections at all. Um,
Mm,
that's those are those most affected by conflict and displacement of people. There are over 4 million internally displaced people in Myanmar right now. So
mhm,
it makes it very difficult to measure. A question that I get often asked is, okay, territory is one thing, but how many people are covered? And truth is, we don't really know. Even the junta
yes,
doesn't have
yes.
a good idea of what the population is, and
Mhm,
if you live under junta authorities, today it's the election, but 2 years ago it was a census that they were doing. Last year it was conscription. So those crackdowns by local administrators, they come and go. You just have to
mhm,
comply. So a lot of people will be voting because it's the path of least resistance. That's how they survive. And we cannot blame anybody who kind of has to, who is compelled to go and vote because not voting would put them in a lot of trouble. It could make them lose their guest registration privileges when they're
mhm,
displaced and they're staying at their friends or family's home. They have to be registered. They can lose financial aid. They can lose food. They can lose, if they're civil servants, they can lose their jobs, quite simply. So
mhm,
there's a lot of strings attached to not voting that make it so that this is not a genuinely participatory environment by any standard.
mhm, mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
that's all I think. Thanks.
as
John, I have a follow-up
yes, ma'am.
question to Amel, if you will allow
Yes,
me.
ma'am. Go,
What,
please.
Amel, what is the procedure for counting of the constituencies covered in December 28th? Will the results be counted? Or on January 11, will the results be counted and released right away? Because that can subvert the majority in the parliament if the results are announced.
Thank you, Ms. Cora. So it's a bit complicated. So the results will be counted immediately, not manually, because this time we're using election voting machines, as you probably know. So the junta has introduced machines. So at the end, all they have to do is press a button, they'll get the tally. That
Uh,
outcome is not published. We are told that the election results will only come out once all phases of the elections are held. And there is
oh,
a rationale for that, is that since voting is township per township, there are constituencies that include several townships. So I think ideally you should not release partial results for constituency and then phase two, phase three. But also, it also raises doubt about transparency because we have no results until we have all the results. And the traceability, the breakdown, Talindu mentioned earlier, tabulation, which for those who may not know, tabulation is the process of adding up results from different polling stations to
mhm,
make up the big picture result. And tabulation is entirely off limits. Nobody has really access. Um, so there's a lot of questions regarding counting, transmission of results, tabulation, and announcement. What
mhm,
we're told by the junta is to expect results not before at the earliest late January, possibly February. But again, there's so many factors that we don't really know for sure that I would put a pin in that until we actually do have the results.
just going back to the point, no, that we've heard from several independent organizations and governments that these elections they have deemed as sham, no. But I just wanted to play the devil's advocate somehow because the Myanmar military junta could easily dismiss these pronouncements as having fallen short of democratic legitimacy as baseless because they have not observed the elections directly. And as ANFREL has also made said that we will not be seeking accreditation observing these elections precisely because the current environment in the country is not um, susceptible to democratic elections. No, so my question just and we have also heard that the military junta has invited countries that they have close ties with to observe the elections, but they're not necessarily independent observers. But I just wanted to ask as well, no, how could we refute this and what are the grounds without having to directly observe the elections in Myanmar, point to the conclusion that these elections are not legitimate and that the environment does not foster free, fair, and democratic elections. Also, just to that question as well, um, can you share with us Like, what is the importance of having independent observers in ensuring electoral integrity? Maybe we can start with Tarindu first.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the independent election observers, of course, it directly link with the electoral integrity, right?
Mhm,
So, and then the transparency of the process. So, as you mentioned earlier, there are the junta already invited the domestic and international election observers to apply for the accreditation. We don't really know yet, like who are going to observe,
mhm,
let's say domestically. So there are, of course, election observer groups who exist before 2020. The credible ones are not going to seek the accreditation like what ANFREL did as an international election observer group. um, but there will be, of course, because and also the international itself, like there are some countries already expressed their willingness to send observers. For
mhm.
example, Cambodia most probably will send the observers. China, Russia, Belarus will also send the observers, and then also we'll see some of the ASEAN countries bilaterally also will send observers. So that's the indication we get when it comes to the election observation. um, but it's important to note that I think the observer organization domestically and internationally who are credible election observer groups actually conduct the systematic election observation like ANFREL,
Mhm,
the European Union. So the European Union also declined the invitation from the military junta, that they said this environment is not conducive for an election. It's not going to be a competitive election, so they are not sending observers. That is something actually not new, right? So if you really look at the situation like in previously Cambodia, Bangladesh, the places where we have seen this kind of stage elections, we also have seen domestic and international election observers are present. But the tricky thing here, those election observers are not the credible ones.
mhm,
For instance, in Cambodia, we have seen a lot of young people observing election in the past election, two cycles. Those are the youth groups linked to the Cambodian People's Party,
mhm,
so that they engineered the election observation, and then they deploy the observers to just to give the rubber stamp to the election process. And
mhm,
also when it comes to international election observers, it's also we seen in Cambodia and even in Bangladesh previously. Those are not the credible groups, but they invite their bilateral partners. Some of the countries come. They do not really conduct the comprehensive observation. They just be
mhm,
present there during the election day, visit some of the polling stations, and then give media statements. So just to whitewash the process, and then like to make it look like a credible and proper election. So but those are not the election observation. What we know, that we conduct, we collect the data comprehensively, we look at the pre-election, election day, post-election, and provide more impartial findings, right? So that's the difference what we see. We will also see probably as those countries that mentioned earlier will be sending like bilaterally their representatives to observe elections, and then they will make statements, but it doesn't mean this election is going to be a free, fair, or transparent one.
Ma'am Cora or Amel?
Okay. The 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 realistic but harsh word for what we are doing in staying away from observation is boycott.
Mm,
Um, Unfrail and the other serious and credible observation groups, international observation groups, are staying away because you want to promote legitimacy. You want to promote democratization. You want to promote human rights when you engage in international election observation. Because it is not a joke to mount a team, a mission to observe what is obviously a sham election from the start.
Yes.
Real observation requires resources. You know,
Mhm.
you bring manpower, you bring technology, you bring people, your organization, and the name of your organization. So, real observation is intentional because of resource allocation and
Mhm.
requirements. Real observation is purposeful. You want to help the country surface the will of the people. You want observation to be to have in the election because you are providing a seal of good election or a seal of bad election after your objective observation. So it has a methodology, inclusive coverage, as much coverage as possible. You
Mhm.
train, uh, you study the technology and the legal framework. So it's a lot of work, and it's a waste of time if you will go into an arena where everything is set up,
Mhm.
and you can only say it is not. I mean, the results. I mean, the observation will 90% yield the observation that it is not fair. It is
Yes.
not good. And the worst thing about it is you spend effort in mounting an election and then you have no certainty that the military will not annul it for the third time. So what's the use?
Amael, can we hear from you as well? You are muted though. I can't hear you. Hello? Still no audio from you. We lost your audio. Maybe you can disconnect and reconnect. Hello? Still no audio. I did not mute you, no. No, I did not.
No, he was not. I think he can disconnect and then
Yeah, you can. Can you
again.
try to disconnect and reconnect? Rejoin. Yes.
There's a sham marriage and there
Sham
is
marriage.
show money. You know the words show money, when you have to present false bank statement. So I think
Uh,
we do not want to be engaged in that show money, show election.
Maybe also just to add, like while
yes.
Amal is joining back, also the when it comes to, let's say, international election observation, that the credibility comes from mostly from the declaration that ANFREL also signed, no, the
Yes.
DOP declaration for of
Yes.
principles for international election observation.
Yes.
So that's the where the guidelines for international election observation are outlined. So
Mhm.
how to do it, what is the process when it comes to, and then how to make sure that you are impartial. um, that's come from there. So
Yes.
we, in the past, we have seen ANFREL, EU, Carter Center, the organizations who are part of the DOP are observing election. This time that we are not going to see any of them are going to observe election. So that also
Yes.
says something about this election process, right?
Mhm.
Amal is
Amael,
back.
you're back. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I wanted to add something about the DOP, but I hear that Tanido already has. So I think I have no further comments. I think everything was said by my colleagues here on the topic. Or maybe just one thing that was hinted at earlier by Tarindu. There is something called the Election Protection Law that the
Mhm.
junta enacted in July. So
Mhm.
you cannot criticize in any way, shape, or form the elections, and that includes very mild criticism. People have been convicted of hard labor for social media posts saying that they would like to see more security in the hometown rather than having an election, and that's enough to get you convicted in Myanmar at the moment. And
Mhm.
that alone makes true election observation impossible because election observation, on top of being principled, methodological, and purposeful, there's also an imperative that you are neutral and that you do report what you see. So it's
Mm.
not criticism for the sake of criticism, but it's constructive
Yes.
criticism to
Yes.
improve areas of the process that need to be improved.
Yes.
If I cannot say anything bad about an election, I'm not
Mm.
observing by definition.
Yes.
And the law makes it impossible. So if you get convicted under the election protection law, there's a minimum sentence of 3 years in prison. And as an observer, I don't think anybody would feel comfortable putting out a press statement saying, well, maybe pay attention to this because this
Yes.
needs improvement.
Mm.
So there's a thread that's hanging over also for media that will be reporting on the elections. That's also true. Of course, international groups may feel a little bit less this pressure because like you leave the country, but domestic groups even more so. But it's irresponsible to observe in these conditions where anybody you speak to is at risk of that law. Any
Yes.
people that you
Yes.
collaborate with, your support staff, your interpreters, they also could take risks under this. So
Yes. Yes.
it that very law in itself makes it impossible. On top of all the other factors mentioned by my colleagues.
Okay. I was also going to mention about DOP, but good thing that Tarindo has already mentioned it. Of course, we have standards that we uphold in observing elections, and that also helps us in understanding and also in deciding whether to observe elections in countries that we monitor. Yes. So we have come down to our last question. Um, I don't know if we will yield a positive answer to the question, but my last set of questions is like, what could happen after the elections, and is there a path to achieve genuine democracy in Myanmar? Also, lastly, because I hope the international community is also paying attention. What could the what role could they play in the situation in Myanmar now? I know it's three questions for our last question, but hopefully you can interconnect the three questions. Yes. Who would like to go first?
I can start mostly. Well, I'll base my answers on answers from the pre-election assessment that we conducted with members of Myanmar civil society.
Mhm.
So more than my opinion, I really want to carry theirs
Yes.
as part of this answer. First, what will happen after the election? Two things. First, the junta will become a so-called civilian government. This is
Mhm.
largely a change of clothes for the generals. Generals will change from military uniform to civilian servant uniform, and they will continue to run the country.
Mhm.
That's because the elections was part of the roadmap after the coup. That was the last point. So it's the only exit strategy they have to close the book on the coup and to pretend a return to normalcy. However,
Mhm.
what most people expect is an increase in violence. Once they are back as a civilian government, they will feel even less bound by decency, by morality. They will continue bombing the old population because as the coup is over, then they will have enough, even more freedom, and they will have potentially some degree of recognition by the international community.
Mhm.
Um, so what a lot of people are afraid of is that the gloves go off, if that's
Mhm.
possible at all in Myanmar after the elections,
Mhm.
which is dreadful to think of when you see the level of violence and casualties already. Um, that's for the first one. What is needed to have any kind of democratic elections in the future? When you talk to people from Myanmar, and we talk to a vast diversity of them, most often the preconditions for any kind of genuine election going forward are there's three of them. The first one is for the military to step down,
Mhm.
unconditional. The junta needs to step down. The junta or the generals in any way, shape, or form need to leave. There needs to be a neutral caretaker government to take care of the country urgent matters as the country can for the election. The second one is to free all political prisoners. There
Yes.
are tens of thousands of political prisoners in Myanmar. Obviously, Aung San Suu Kyi and other high-level NLD officials are
Mhm.
the best known, but a lot of people who were peacefully protesting, a lot of reporters, dissident activists, there's too many of them, and their release is an unconditional prerequisite for any kind of moving forward agreements. Um, and the third one is to have a genuine, open opening of the political space. So again, allow all political parties that want to participate, allow media, reopen just like it was done pre 2015. Between 2010 and 2015, the civic space was opened, so you could write almost anything that you wanted. You could talk freely about politics. So that also needs to come back. Um, and of course, armed conflict, but armed conflict is a picture. There is armed conflict at different levels across the country, but an end to violence is also what a lot of people would hope for, even though it may not be absolute, it may not be in 100% of the country, but an end to most egregious instances of violence against civilians would be a prerequisite as well. So that's the message they usually carry to us that they want us to share with the international community, and that's what I'll do here. That's all. I'll say. Thank you.
Maybe
Yeah,
we can hear from Tarindu also and Ma'am Cora about what the international community could play. What role can they play in this situation in Myanmar?
just to add what Amal has mentioned, like the
Yes.
request and demands come from the people of Myanmar because
Mhm.
for the assessment and also afterwards assessment that they've been talking to a lot of groups from the country itself. So they also actually demand, especially from international community, to support the other alternative mechanisms in place
Mhm.
right now. uh, for example, there are quite a few number of interim governments within Myanmar in different states and regions are being formed. For example, in Sagain, in Karenni state. So that's they also demand for international community to directly engage with those
Mhm.
interim mechanisms. So because they are a part of, these interim government consist of the civil society, resistant forces, and then the people from the ground, so that they are demanding to engage with them and then to support them to improve their governance itself. So because even though the conflict time with all the issues that they have, they were still able to bring the people. And also I think very important thing that for international community to do, the facilitate the dialogue between different the groups across Myanmar. So we see right now the hundreds of resistant groups are in place in different ethnic areas, and also now we see the plainlands of Myanmar like Sagain, Mandalay. That there are a lot of groups, so that I think it is also very much important for international community to support and facilitate the dialogue in between them. So that is one of the other a way that international community can support, instead of just being supporting this the juntas made narrative, and then the military who are suppressing the people, like since 1962.
In terms of international community, we move to Ma'am Cora. I know Ma'am Cora and I are Filipinos, and as we know, the Philippines is going to be the chair of ASEAN next year in 2026. No, so the court is in our ball, Ma'am Cora. The Filipinos
Okay,
and the
yeah,
Philippines.
no. Well, let me start with a statement that every country has a different playbook. Um, Let me share with you what happened in the Philippines. There was a time when we were under military rule. Marcos, the father of the present president, declared martial law in 1972. He officially lifted the martial law in paper in 1981. But he continued to rule. It was just a change in nomenclature. So from 1981 to 1985, he continued to rule, assuming both legislative and executive authority, but in a non-martial law regime. Anyway, the international community kind of, what do you call it, triggered it because in a state of peak, Marcos said, the father, okay, I will declare a snap election. You're saying I'm not legitimate. I will declare a snap election. The civil society group moved in.
Mhm.
Um, we protected the votes. NAMFREL was very active at the time.
Mhm.
We mobilized. Well, I wasn't personally involved because I was still working then. So NAMFREL mobilized its people, mounted an Operation Quick Count to validate the vote of the UEC or our COMELEC. Well, at the time, everything was political, Marcos loyalists. So you had a COMELEC which counted votes over, well, we say it's over and above because some of the contracted professionals who were new in IT, 1986 election, walk out, some 35 of them. They were contracted professionals. They walk out because they were saying, what is being flashed on the board is different from what we are keying in the canvassing. COMELEC had another count. A minor group, a teeny, were well, we had about at the time, although I don't think it is so, we had about 300,000 people on the ground. What do you call this? Sending tabulation copies to a central headquarters. Meanwhile, COMELEC was NAMFREL was making a parallel count, and so the parallel count said that the opposition president, I will not give names anymore, that the opposition president had something like 8 million votes, and that Marcos, the father, had about 6 million votes. And the civil society said, this is what is correct. So that is, but COMELEC vote was the other way around. You know, the figures were reversed for Marcos. So that it stayed on the count. But it was to trigger the heart, it was to touch the heart of many Filipinos who mounted the people power revolt. And Marcos is out of office. And the lady who opposed him was installed as the president. What I'm saying is it has to be in the hands of the Myanmar people. The foreign community cannot do it for them. The foreign community can fund. The foreign community can support. For example, the script is now open that Marcos talked to the U.S. president and said, you know, this is what is happening. I want your support. And the president of the U.S. said, cut and cut clean, quotable now. Cut and cut clean, meaning you don't get our support because we are getting the picture from our whoever that the people are restive and that this lady won the election. And so there was a turnover of power supported by the election with CSOs, among others, NAMFREL, and the church played a very, very big role. So what I'm saying is the foreign powers cannot directly intervene. The foreign powers will support whoever the people are supporting. They cannot germinate the idea unless, well, in puppet governments, they can do that. So, in the coming election, 2025, will they go to the polls? Will they vote for who they think they can truly rule the country? Will the election results be credible? Will they support? Can they tolerate another reversal of their will? It's up to them. And no one can write that. As one of our saints, Catholic saints, said, God writes straight, but in crooked lines. So who knows the future of the election? Probably this election can trigger something. But what I'm saying is it's not the outsiders who can do it for them. It's for them. It is for the Myanmar people. And let me quote an irony. In one of the reports of ANFREL, I think it is in the 2015 election,
Mhm.
um, the then chairman of ANFREL was quoted to have said, "It remains to be seen whether the recent success of democracy in Myanmar will be emulated elsewhere in Asia. Democratic deterioration in too many countries in recent years are prevalent. And UEC, the Election Commission, is highly commended for delivering a credible election to the citizens, which everyone, international and local elements believe in." So there was almost a magical moment when Myanmar had it. It was supposed to be a model for uh, initiating and showing to the world the possibility of, you know, people determining their fate. But what happened? 2015, 2025, 10 years. So a lot of things can happen.
Yes. Let me just add, no, of course, as people who are looking from the outside in, no, and considering the situation in Myanmar, where people are at risk, of course. Amael has also pointed out about just the election law that has been stifling dissent in Myanmar. Of course, we as part of the international community will always be here to help out in amplifying the voices of those who dare to speak out in the about the situation in Myanmar, and those who want and strive to have genuine democracy in the country. Of course, we hope to empower them in defining a more democratic space for themselves. But of course, we continue to stand by, we continue to support, and we continue to help in whatever way we can to support the democratization and the democratic aspirations of the people of Myanmar. Before I say goodbye to our guests today, Amael, you have a speaking engagement this afternoon. Can you invite people to join and participate?
Sure. For those who are in Bangkok, I will be speaking tonight at the 7 p.m. at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. I believe that will also be live streamed on their Facebook page. It is a panel discussion on the elections. There will be two activists from Myanmar civil society, and there will also be the head of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights for the Myanmar team. That will be on the panel discussion. So feel free to join in person or online. It should be an interesting event, and there'll be a lot of, at least on my part, a lot of data visualization to try to make it crystal clear why these elections are problematic. Um, so looking forward to that. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Ma'am Cora, Tarindu, and Amael for joining us
Welcome.
today. I will have to remove you from the stream to formally close the show, but thank you for the insights that you shared this morning.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Jen.
Thank you.
And that has been the Election Observer podcast episode on the current situation in Myanmar ahead of the military junta planned elections and the realities of election observation under the military rule. This was co-produced in cooperation, of course, with our program officer for Civic Space, May. Hello, May. Thank you for the hard work, of course. Get the latest news and updates about ANFREL programs and activities through our Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok pages. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and WhatsApp channels. Please follow the Election Observer podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you for joining us again today. We hope to see you next year when we launch season 3 of the Election Observer podcast. I'm your host, John Antiquera. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.